Now I see myself. Okay, friends. It's noon Eastern on Monday, September 14th. It's time for Training Café. That's where we get together with coffee and talk training and climbing. What could be better? So let's begin this episode with the sip together. We commune over climbing and coffee. What could be better than freshly brewed coffee? Boy. Well, I'm sorry I missed last Monday. I'm going to try to do these most weeks, but I can't make promises that I'll be here every Monday at noon Eastern. Things happen. I'm going to be traveling. The fall weather is beginning to arrive here in the Northeast where I live. And I'm going to be doing some traveling and, I'll maybe do some training cafes from on the road this fall. And certainly as we get into winter training season, I think I'll be here every single week for us to commune over coffee and talk training for climbing. As always, I want to begin this episode with a shout out. This one I love. Chuck Odette, age 64, an American climber based out of Utah, sent 514B last week. Now, I've known Chuck for quite some time. He's been in the climbing industry. He's recently retired. He was with Petzl America for a long time. And now he's kind of climbing full time with his wife, Maggie, and they're both crushers, climbing 514 at, let's say, an advanced age. That's impressive. To stay injured, to stay motivated, and to fight off this attrition of physical fitness that occurs as you get older. And so you have to be a special person to be willing to make the sacrifices and do just about everything right, to keep your body together, to perform at that level at, age 64 is impressive. And a big part of Chuck's, success is, he does climb a lot. So he's probably about as efficient as you get at climbing steep rock. Efficiency is really important when you're trying to get every little bit out of your body and not waste any energy. And then, of course, nutrition is a big part of his game. And I've worked with Chuck on that through my company, PhysiVantage, to give him the nutritional tools to be able to climb as hard as possible and not get injured at age 64. And by the way, Chuck is not just a grandfather, but a great grandfather. So think of that next time you're out struggling on your project, that a great grandfather's climbed 8C, 514B. That's pretty amazing. So that is very worthy of a shout out, and also kind of sets the stage nicely for this, the main topic of this training cafe, which is turning impossible into I'm possible. Now, it sounds like I could devolve into a Tony Robbins speech of some kind, some self-help, speech. But, a lot of that self-help stuff, though there can be some good stuff in there. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but a lot of it is nebulous and just kind of a pep talk and, set goals, dream big, and, you'll achieve anything you want. And what's missing from those pep talks is the lack of a system, the lack of a plan for action, and the discipline, the willpower to follow through day in and day out. It's very easy to set goals. Everybody does that somewhere, various aspects of their life. But to set goals and then develop a plan, a strategy, have the self-awareness to course correct, and then to have the discipline to separate yourself from things pulling you away from the goal, distractions and other things in your life that steal your time and energy and focus, to separate those things off and to be more mentally focused, have your energy, your attention focused on reaching that goal. I mean, that's what it takes to turn impossible into I'm possible. And, when we talk about impossible, we can think of big things like climbing Mount Everest or going to the moon, or breaking the 4-minute mile barrier. Those are classic examples of impossible that became possible. But every single day, there are climbers and non-climbers doing things in their life which they previously viewed as being impossible. Think of the beginner climber, just learning to climb 5'6" or 5'8". To them, climbing 5'12", 7'8", 7A plus, would seem impossible. Their first day into the gym or their first season climbing outside. But, if they stay with it and develop a plan, I think pretty much any climber can achieve the 512 grade. In fact, somebody wrote a book one time called How to Climb 512, the premise of which was pretty much anybody, if they set their mind to it and focus, can achieve the 512 grade. Of course, what about 514, 515? Those are grades I've never climbed. And in my mind, I guess, as a 40-something climber, have dreamed of, but never really viewed as being possible. And that's kind of where this, that's kind of where the waters part, or, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably going to be right. I mean, that's a famous saying that's been around forever, and it certainly applies to goals in climbing or elsewhere in our life. And so I think we have to have an imagination that kind of takes us somewhere inspiring. Einstein famously said, your imagination is a preview to your life's coming attractions. But it's a preview to a movie you're never going to see if you can't develop a system and take meaningful action on a regular basis. And so these are topics I've talked about before. I've done a few podcasts over the years on this subject of effective goal setting and goal pursuit. My book, Maximum Climbing, has a whole chapter on goal setting and goal pursuit. So those would be resources you could tap into for a deeper study on this subject. But I kind of want to keep this short and sweet here today. And then I see quite a few questions have been typed in the last few minutes. And so I'd like to every episode get to, 10 or 12 questions if I can. But getting back to turning in climbing impossible into I'm possible. Some recent examples of that, well, of course, Tommy Caldwell, Don Wall, which was a multi-year mission for him. He had to recruit partners over the years and, keep kind of course correcting and route finding initially those early seasons. Just where is there potential for, possibility to free climb up that section of El Capitan. And then eventually he and Kevin Jorgensen pulled it off and turned impossible into possible. I think Tommy would definitely tell you that his mindset, his approach to these big missions was based on what he had observed Todd Skinner, a climber of my generation, doing. Beginning in the late 1980s, Skinner and Piana did the first free ascent of Salathé Wall, something that was viewed as impossible. And it became possible. And then Todd went on to, Triangle Tower and a number of other big ascents where, Todd was famous for setting audacious goals, and lots of skeptics Todd had, no doubt about it. In fact, all of these big achievers had their share of skeptics and critics who said that's impossible. And perhaps even you in your life having a more modest goal comparatively, whether it's your career goal or your goal to climb 512 or 513, or to climb a big wall someday, and you're just a beginner now, you may have people around you who are skeptics. That's natural because sadly, I think as a prevailing way of thinking, there are more impossibility thinkers out there than possibility thinkers out there. There's a recent book out called Loserthink, which I think hits the nail on the head about, culturally, we're in a place right now that glorifies, things that aren't really that great of achievement, things in pop culture that, you become an instant success or a one-hit wonder or YouTube star. But, do you really have a meaningful skill set? Have you really worked hard for years to become great at something? And meanwhile, the handful of people that are dreaming big and developing a plan of action often are behind the scenes, don't get the publicity, but maybe still get their share of detractors or critics. And so it really takes today an even more special person, I think, to be able to set a big, meaningful goal and to follow through on it in the long term, despite the naysayers, despite, people with little skill and lots of loserthink getting success, being viewed as successful in this crazy culture and media era we live in. And so it's doesn't surprise me that when you do run into these high achievers like a Caldwell or a Honnold, those people don't spend a lot of time on the internet reading other people's opinions and bathing themselves in loserthink and the criticism and all that garbage. They might dabble in social media, partially because it's their job as a pro athlete, and they might like to engage like-minded folks. But you don't see those people chiming in on garbage issues or wasting their time. I doubt spending much time on social media, killing time because they have more important things to do. You only have 24 hours a day. And if you're going to train and sleep and eat right, well, that probably consumes 12 hours of your day right there. And so you only have 12 hours left over to maybe do other stuff, whether it's your job or school or family, friend activities, important, meaningful relationships. And so you really need to be a compulsive planner to be effective, especially in this complex era that we live in. I mean, these are things that I've kind of developed slowly over decades on the fly. I'm in my 50s. And so I, as a teenager or 20-something, probably was not a very effective user of time. But over the years, kind of sussed out a pathway to becoming moderately successful in what I do. Hopefully you can streamline your approach and become hyper successful in what you want to do by learning from people like me along the way. So kind of in summary, you need to unleash your imagination and think big. I think it's good to have a kind of lifetime project or lifetime goal in climbing, but that could be so distant, 5, 10, 20 years in the future, that it's also maybe more important to have an in-between goal. What would be your big goal for the next year or two? Or even the next season, the next few months. For me, climbing wise, there's a route at the Red River Gorge called Angry Birds that I've dabbled on before. I'd like to put some focused effort into that this fall. If I can get the good weather, and I'm in pretty good shape right now, I think it's doable. I'm believing that it's not impossible, but I'm not quite there to believing that it's possible. But hopefully in a few weeks, I'll begin my work and develop some momentum and bring that to fruition. That's my goal. And hopefully you have a similar goal, whatever it may be, in climbing this autumn season. You need to, after unleashing your imagination and writing down some goals, and maybe sub goals to get you to the big goal, then you need a system. And that's where most people fall short. Everybody can set goals, but very few people can take meaningful action. And so developing that system, that is your training, your nutrition, your sleep, getting enough recovery time, not getting injured, because if you get injured, that's an end to your goal, at least in the short term. It's a setback. And a system that training wise also works with the rest of your life. If you're like me, you have a job and a family, and you got multiple balls to juggle. And so that obviously means you need to make sure you invest your time wisely, and probably have to eliminate a lot of junk activities and junk time, and maybe even some junk training from your routine to free up time to invest in meaningful things. And meaningful activities that are going to get you from here to there. And then the third thing is discipline, to stay and follow through day in and day out. Some people can set goals and take action for a few days or a few weeks, and then they kind of fall off course. They get distracted by other things or other people. And to keep that vivid picture in mind, to have things written down, reminders where in your on your bathroom mirror, in your training room, where you work, having those types of reminders, pictures of your route or your goals, or sayings or quotes that inspire you and into action. It's all about having a bias for action. Having kind of a get shit done mentality each and every day. I still make to-do lists on a Post-it note, because that's how I can just organize my day and leverage myself to stay on track to taking meaningful actions. For me, a written to-do list each and every day is what works. Otherwise, you get sucked off course and go down a rabbit hole or whatnot, and end up wasting hours of your day and your life, making no progress anywhere. So think big and set goals is one. Develop a system, a game plan is two. And then three is the discipline to take meaningful action each day, each week, each year, and course correcting along the way until you reach your goal. That's really what, again, let's go back to climbing. The big name climbers, the big achievements, especially breaking a new grade of difficulty that's not been achieved before. That's kind of like breaking the 4-minute mile, because it hasn't been done before. So the prevailing thinking is it is impossible, and it takes a special person like Roger Bannister in the case of the 4-minute mile to believe in it enough and take action enough and actually do it, and break that barrier. In climbing, it was Warren Harding, the first person to climb at El Capitan, period, back in the late 1950s. And then Lynn Hill, the first person to free climb the nose of El Capitan. So those are big barriers to be broken. Adam Ondra climbing Silence, the world's first 515D, coming back to it over and over and constantly training and course correcting and figuring out what needed to be done to do that route. A competition climber like Janja Garnbret, the Slovenian female climber who won basically every World Cup bouldering event. I think she did win every one last year in 2019, which is unheard of. That's like a pro golfer winning every golf tournament for a year, or a baseball pitcher winning every game that he started. That's just incredible. That makes Janja, in my mind, one of the most dominant athletes in the world last year. That didn't happen by accident. That was a big goal to do it, a game plan and strategy, a system to make it happen. And then, of course, the discipline to follow through. And maybe you could say a little bit of luck, too, not getting injured, because that is a big factor. Margo Hayes, the first female to climb 515A a few years ago, had a system and was very disciplined. And even her partners who she was there working La Rambla with were skeptical when she first said she wanted to work that route. But she eventually changed their minds. She had her mind made up already. She was going to do that route. But the guys she was with, her friends, who were skeptical when she first set the goal, slowly became believers as they saw her work ethic and mindset and can-do mentality, and the rest is history. And so we, in our own way, can become more like Margo, or more like Ondra, or more like Janja, or more like Skinner or Gullich. And that's why we need those big name climbers to fix our eyes on and be motivated, because we may never, probably won't achieve what they have achieved, but in our own mind, what is our equivalent of the nose of El Cap, freeing it, or winning the World Cup every event in a season, or silence the first 5:15D. For you, that might be doing your first 5:11D, or for me, doing my first 5:13D. And so it's all relative, but we can fix our eyes on those grand people in our sport, and also people in other activities, people who inspire us in other ways, that can help us believe in our own way, in the possibilities. So enough there. Rambled on here for about 20 minutes. Hopefully that was helpful and meaningful, and gave you some things to think about and maybe begin to take action on yourself. And I guess if there's one thing I would end with is, if you are heading into your fall climbing season, why not right now set a goal? Like, it could be a boulder problem. It could be a goal to achieve in your climbing gym if you're mainly an indoor climber, or it could be an outdoor climbing goal, as I have set. Between now and the end of the year, what would be that one goal that kind of you focus your energies on, and marshal your resources and throw away the distractions that are holding you back, like lead weights holding you down? What thing can you focus on to get it done? And maybe write it down right now and hang it up somewhere that you can see it each and every day. And just by doing that, you've taken the biggest step you can take into turning that impossible into I'm possible. Okay, so let's get on to some questions here for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will wrap things up. I'm going to scroll up. Ooh, holy smokes, quite a few here. Okay, first question, Brandon, heading to the Red River Gorge in December. Hope it doesn't snow on you. There can be some brilliant days in December at the Red, but there can be some dismal, short, dark, cold days as well. But if you get a good stretch of weather, then of course the Red River Gorge is more of an endurance, sustained type climbing area. There are exceptions to that, of course, but most of the routes are steep, have fairly good holds, and it's just about overcoming the pump, or making it to the chains before you pump out. And so those are very aerobic climbs. Your climbing specific aerobic system is very, very important. I'm talking about making ATP in your climbing muscles via the aerobic pathway. And so that's something that takes a long-term effort to train, in fact, seasons, but you can train that up somewhat over months. So I would go climbing twice a week in the gym or outside with the intention of climbing for volume, sub-maximally. If you're on routes that pump you out to the point of failure, then that's not the best for training the aerobic energy system. You want to be climbing at an intensity of maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 and doing it in a sustained fashion, and not reaching failure. That's kind of that threshold between aerobic and anaerobic that you want to be hovering around. So you can get pumped, but not pumped out, not powered out. So 2 sessions a week of that. And then I think it's very important to do 2 strength training sessions a week, or at least 1, because by developing a higher peak finger force, let's say, then you occlude blood flow at a higher relative force, which means you are aerobic, functioning below the aerobic threshold on smaller holds and on harder moves. And so you really need a 2-part strategy in the long term to spin up your aerobic system, and then also to take your max strength to the next level. And then the last 2 to 4 weeks before you go to the Red, that's when you want to do your lactic training, your really pumpy training, to get those short-term adaptations that bring your anaerobic system up to snuff. because ideally you want to arrive at the red and have all three energy systems up to snuff. If you're going to a more bouldery climbing area, I'd have a different game plan for you. But if you're going to the red, that's the best, let's say, 3-month approach to get ready for a December trip. Okay, let's move on here. Wondering if I can use pull-ups and short duration repeaters in the same workout as climbing specific exercises. LP, you sure can. As long as those short duration repeaters, like I assume you're talking about something like the 7-3, 7 second on, 3 second off, times 7. So you're doing 6 7-second hangs. That takes 1 minute to go through that set of repeaters. And if you do many of those sets in a row, so if you're at a low enough intensity, the hold is big enough, or maybe you're removing some weight from your body with a counterweight system, if you're at a low enough intensity where you can do a 1 minute set of repeaters, then 1 minute rest, then another 1 minute set of repeaters and a 1 minute rest. And if you keep going like that for 10 to 20 minutes, I think ideally 20 or even 30 minutes once you have a good base condition, that is a great way to train that local aerobic energy system. There's a high oxidative flux if you do those repeaters for 20 or 30 minutes in that fashion. Now, if the holds are too small or you're adding too much weight to your body and you can only do 3 sets of repeaters like that and then you're fatigued, well, then you're not training the aerobic system so much. It becomes more an anaerobic exercise. So in any case, if you're doing it in a way that you're going for the 20 or 30 minutes of repeaters, what you could do is at the end of your 1 minute set of repeaters, then on a pull-up bar or the bucket hold of the hangboard, do 4 or 5 pull-ups, just a few pull-ups. So you do your repeaters, and then when you're done with your 1 minute set of repeaters, you do, let's say, 3 to 5 pull-ups. And then you rest for the rest of your 1 minute break. And then you're on to your next set of 7-3 repeaters. That takes 1 minute. When that minute's up, you do your 3 to 5 pull-ups, again, on a bar or a bucket hold. And then you rest for 50 seconds or whatever you have left. And then you just keep repeating that. And if you do that for 20 or 30 minutes, you'll end up doing, 50 to 100 pull-ups. You'll end up, getting a really good climbing specific aerobic session for both your forearm and your pulling muscles. And so that would be a real good strategy to link those two together. Train kind of the same energy system with a couple of different exercises. Okay. Okay, here's a question that I could really spend a lot of time on. I've kind of touched on. He's asking what is meant by aerobic power. Aerobic power is what is the volume of ATP that you can generate via the aerobic pathway. So like if you're a runner, you want to have a high aerobic power in your leg muscles that enable you to run, because the aerobic pathway is something that can potentially power you for hours. Like if you're going to run a marathon, when you run a marathon, 99.5% of the ATP is being made via the aerobic pathway. In doing a long, steep route, just like silence, Adam Ondra on silence, despite it being very pumpy and at times anaerobic on the hard boulders, the route is actually more aerobic than it is anaerobic. Climbing at the Red River Gorge, again, it's more aerobic than it is anaerobic. You need to be strong. You need to have an anaerobic reserve, but to get up 100 feet of overhanging rock you're making more ATP aerobically than you are anaerobically. That's pretty simple sports science. So aerobic power is the measure of how big or how fast you can generate ATP via the aerobic pathway. And so there's different ways to train that. I kind of explained that the fingerboard repeaters done for 30 minutes is a good way to train the climbing specific aerobic pathway in your finger flexor muscles. Other types of interval training, as long as they're not overly pumpy, can be good for developing the climbing specific aerobic system. Doing sub-maximal route climbing. Like I go to a climbing gym. In fact, I did yesterday and did 10 routes. The gym is very steep, so most of the routes are overhanging. The holds tend to be fairly positive. And I did 10 routes that took me on average, let's say 4 to 5 minutes to climb. So in aggregate, I had 40 to 50 minutes of sub-maximal climbing. I was mostly doing routes between 511A and 512D. And I think I only fell on one of the routes. So for the most part, since I didn't fall, I was sub-maximal. So I was getting pumped, but not pumped out. I was resting and shaking out, keeping blood flowing. That's what you should be thinking about when you're training the aerobic energy system on routes, is keeping the blood flowing, not grabbing small holds that occlude blood flow. And if you do, only for a few seconds. As long as blood is flowing and as long as you don't pump out, you are more aerobic than you are anaerobic. As soon as you occlude blood flow by doing a near maximal move or maximal grip, when the blood flow gets occluded, then the flow of oxygen is stopped and you're going anaerobic. And that's when you get that sick pump. And so you want to avoid the sick pump to train the aerobic pathway. And so I'll leave it at that. I've done podcasts, I think 4 podcasts a couple of years ago on energy system training. If you go to iTunes or Spotify or my website, trainingforclimbing.com, and search for, Training for Climbing podcast, energy system training, you'll find 4 hours of, research-based content laying out, I think in a more detailed way for climbers, how to apply energy system strategies and science to effective training for climbing. It's not essential stuff to know for a beginner climber, but if you're an intermediate to advanced climber, really trying to push the envelope and refine your training, then you need to understand at least some important concepts relating to energy system training. Okay, moving on here. Ian, what are your thoughts on doing hard repeats on boulders outside with extra weight? I'm not a big fan of weight, putting on a weight belt or weight vest for outdoor bouldering, just because, the holds, as you kind of mentioned, tend to be sharp and, you're going to increase skin wear. Outdoor climbing can put you into more awkward positions than most indoor routes are set in a little more friendly way. I think it tempts injury. I just don't think it's ideal. I think doing repeats on an outdoor route or problem is a valid strategy to train, just not doing it with extra weight. Now, indoors, if you're on a system wall, if you're on a tread wall, you're on a bouldering wall with good, safe holds and moves, then I think adding some weight on has utility. And, it's a powerful training modality for training anaerobic endurance and also max strength. Again, you really need to know how to apply your energy system training concepts to hit the protocols just right. A lot of climbers go to the gym and they think they're training one energy system, but they're really training another. Like they're doing a lot of hard, steep boulders, 20-foot high boulders that in reality take them 40 seconds to climb. And they think they're developing maximum strength. They're not. A hard 40-second boulder problem, that's right in the anaerobic zone, anaerobic endurance or lactic zone. And so you are training the lactic pathway, not the alactic pathway, which is what is where you're operating when you're doing a maximum strength exercise. So going to your tension board and doing a 3 or 5 move boulder problem that you can do in 10 seconds, that would train maximum strength. Going to your campus board or hangboard and doing a maximum set that takes you 5 to 10 seconds, that would train maximum strength. But a 40-second steep boulder problem is pretty much pure anaerobic lactic training. So again, a lot of people think they know what they're doing, but they're not quite applying it right. And therefore, they're not going to get the results they would anticipate. And take it from me, I trained in very incorrect methods for a long time. I've been climbing for 44 years, so we didn't know how to train in the 80s or 90s. We did a lot of things that to me today are laughable, but we didn't know better. There was no climbing science, and there were no climbing coaches that could help instruct you like I'm trying to do here today. Okay, boy, a lot of questions here. I don't know how I'm going to get through all of these, but let's just see here. Okay, Greg, not making a lot of progress at 7-3 repeaters. I do 5 sets, 1 group, take a 10-minute rest. Yeah, well, what you're describing there is more of a strength endurance protocol. This protocol that Greg is outlining here, with the 10-minute break between groups, that is more for that anaerobic lactic energy system. It trains that, preferentially over the other energy systems. But that is the least trainable of the 3 energy systems, Greg. And so, yes, you will not get much progress after you've done that for a few weeks or a month or two. I point this out time and time again, that anaerobic lactic energy system is the least trainable of the 3 energy systems. So to break through that barrier you're at, Greg, you need to take your maximum strength to the next level and then circle back to strength endurance training after you've done that. And so it's time to put that protocol away and start doing some 10-second max hangs, or shift to the 753 protocol that I've detailed in my Training for Climbing book and in previous podcasts. So you want to train maximum strength for a few weeks or a month, probably twice a week, and then circle back to the repeaters, and you'll find you take things to the next level. Hopefully. Because there are no absolutes in training for climbing, by the way. What works for one person isn't guaranteed to work for another. I mean, genetics play a huge role in training adaptations. There are non-responders. That's just a fact. Nutrition and diet is the other, and sleep, recovery is the other side of the training. If you're training hard but not sleeping and eating right, you're not going to get the results of a person who is. And then there's your training history, or your tendon loading history. I mean, there's a myriad of things that affect training adaptations. And so that's why these cookie cutter training programs that are commonly passed out, and even in my books, I have some of these blueprints for training. It's just a starting point. There's no guaranteed results because you're all different. And so, 2 or 3 people using the same training protocol will get 2 or 3 sets of different results out of them. Okay, Nicholas. Do I recommend doing shoulder and core protocol every day? Well, it depends. Core you can do pretty much every day, though I don't think it should be exhaustive core. And probably it would be best just to do it 4 or 5 days per week. But your core, you're working every day just by being up and around and lifting objects. Your core is one of those muscle groups that gets worked every day. Your finger flexors obviously do not. Because in everyday life, we don't really use our finger flexors in a strenuous way. So the fingers and the tendons can't be treated like your legs, because you haven't stood on your fingers your whole life like you have your legs. So, finger flexors need off days. Core, less so. Legs, less so. Though, again, you can't do squats 7 days a week. So core, you can do something every day, but you're really excessive or intensive core, hardcore training, I would still limit to maybe 3 days, and maybe do some more endurance core a couple of days, like long duration planks and things like that. Shoulders, you got to be careful about because, you don't want to do anything that's going to elicit much hypertrophy in your shoulders. A little bit of muscle mass gain, a pound or two, wouldn't be a bad thing, I think, for most climbers, because shoulder strength and stability is important. But, those small rotator cuff muscles that are most overlooked by climbers, internal and external rotation, and doing Ys and Ts with a sling trainer, those types of things, I do them as a warm-up on my climbing days, and then maybe do a little extra stuff on your non-climbing days. But you don't want to do anything excessive or like nothing bodybuilding like, that's for sure, for your shoulders. If your shoulders are starting to look like a bodybuilder's shoulders, then it's time for you to change your program, because it's not appropriate for climbing. I mean, take a look at, the top climbers, and they don't have bodybuilder bodies. They're ripped, yes, but they don't have bodybuilder bodies. Mass is kind of the enemy, despite what maybe some coaches say. You don't want to bulk up your legs or even your arms or back much, if at all, because that goes against the strength to weight ratio, which is everything for steep climbing. Or not everything, but physiologically, it's the number one key performance indicator. Beta-Alanine. I think Beta-Alanine can work for climbers, but it's not an acute nutritional supplement. You don't take it like if you take a caffeine tablet, you feel it. It has an acute effect. Beta-Alanine is not that way. For it to work, you have to take it every single day, probably 3 servings a day, 3 to 5 grams, 3 times a day. So you got to make a real commitment to taking beta-alanine to get the intercellular storage of the carnosine up. And what it is for folks who don't know, beta-alanine, when it is stored in the body intracellularly, it's a first line of defense against acidosis. Those hydrogen ions that are generated when ATP is split for energy, you can kind of have this first line of defense that you can build up a little bit and can potentially improve strength endurance a little bit, anaerobic reserve a little bit by taking the beta-alanine. But you need to do it on a daily basis. So I have experimented with it. I don't know that it's been a big difference maker for me. Maybe it's a 0.5% or 1%. And most people aren't going to recognize that. Somebody climbing at their very limit might recognize it. I think maybe vegetarians are most in need of supplementing with a little bit of beta-alanine and maybe a little bit of creatine too. Creatine, you got to be careful because that will cause weight gain and cramping and can have negative effects on climbing performance if you load creatine, like a bodybuilder or a football player might. But the creatine dose, a microdose, 1 or 2 grams a day, 3 at most, especially for a vegetarian who doesn't, get any creatine in their diet through red meat, I think can benefit a little bit from those types of supplements. The PhysiVantage vegan protein called PowerPlex has microdoses. And so if you're consuming a scoop or 2 of the PowerPlex a day as a vegan athlete, a vegan climber, or plant-based climber, you are actually getting the microdoses without even knowing it. I designed the products that way because I think it is more important for a plant-based climber. Okay, so let's move on here. I see some people entering multiple questions, so I apologize for skipping over them, but I want to try to get to more folks here. Robinson. Yeah, it depends. I do think the 753 protocol is a superior maximum strength protocol for more advanced climbers, people that have a long training history, that have done hangboard training for a few years already, probably can benefit by graduating to the 753 protocol. What that is, folks, it's a max strength protocol I developed. You hang for 7 seconds, rest for 53, and then hang for 7, rest for 53, and then one more time, hang 7, and then you rest for 3 to 5 minutes. So you're doing 3 7-second hangs with incomplete rest in between. Really, really targets the anaerobic alactic energy system and develops maximum grip strength. And you typically would want to do that, like I do it on half crimp and open crimp grips primarily, and do 3 to 5 sets of the 753 protocol. So that would be a total of 9 to 15 total hangs because there's 3 hangs in each set. Now he's asking about doing other grip positions. Yeah, you could do, 2-finger pocket grip for a set or 2 if you do a lot of pocket climbing. And if you're doing pinch training, which I recommend doing standing upright with pinch blocks in your hands and weights hanging from them, you could do a similar protocol. But for this to be effective, it needs to be near maximal. So unlike the repeaters, that we wanted to be submaximal if you want to train the aerobic energy system. We're at the other end of the spectrum with the 753 protocol. You need to add weight to your body. You want to add enough weight that if you were doing a 1 rep hang, maybe you could hang on for 9 or 10 seconds. So a 7-second hang, or the first 7-second hang, you don't reach failure. And the second 7-second hang, you maybe get close. And then in the third 7-second hang of the set, you probably are right at your limit if you've got their weight correct. And so for me, I use a 14 millimeter transgression edge and have my training weights around 80 pounds. I weigh 160. So that's pretty heavy weight, 50% of my body weight added on. But I train that way a lot. All of my training blocks, I do that because at my age, I'm trying to maintain maximum finger strength, to fight off sarcopenia. Right now I'm testing my grip strength about as high as it's been in my whole life, which is, how amazing is that? If I'm 56 and my grip strength, my peak finger force is pretty much the same as it was when I was 26. Not a lot of athletes can say that in their 50s, they're operating at a peak force on any exercise at the same level they were in their 20s or 30s. And so that's a testament to me staying uninjured and training right and eating and supplementing right, and still hopefully able to climb at a very high level and maybe do Angry Birds this fall. Who the heck knows? Let's hope so. That's the goal. Tips for a 13-year-old girl trying to push her grade to 11B. Just climb a lot. Teenage kids, climb 3 days a week. I think, you will get there, or she would get there, or any climber can get to 11B if you climb 3 days per week. Climbing is a skill sport first. Now, some people, whether they're youths or adults, really lack upper body strength. And so doing some pull-ups and some basic training can supplement that 3-day-a-week climbing, but nothing crazy for the 13-year-old. No campus training, probably no hangboard training yet. I don't think that would be necessary. And she will continue to improve. Don't rush the process. And also, I think it's good for youth athletes to be involved in other activities. So I love to see my teenage athletes, as my kids were, involved in at least 2 sports, climbing being one of them, and then something else they can do and have kind of an off season from climbing. That's a good, responsible way to develop a high physiological IQ and avoid burnout in youth athletes. Okay, thank you there for the feedback. And let me see where I'm at time-wise. Wow, over 45 minutes already. So as always, Eric can be a little bit long-winded here. So if you're bailing out, then that's a sign I need to tune out here. But actually, I see 56 people viewing. So that's great that you've hung in this long. That tells me the content maybe isn't droning on here so much. Okay, so a couple more questions. Charles, a lot of structured training focuses on energy systems. Don't dive that much into how skill training fits. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so it's kind of interesting, Charles. Until about 3 years ago, energy system training was really not heard of in climbing. My 3rd edition of Training for Climbing came out in 2016, and has a section on energy system training and how to kind of test it and how to, prescribe a program to train the different energy pathways. And then I did the podcast, and some other coaches got on board, and now all of a sudden it seems everybody's talking energy system training. But we can't forget, climbing is a skill sport. And so there are, I say this a lot, there are a lot of climbers walking around who have the finger strength to climb 515A, even though they might only be climbing 514A outside, or maybe not even 514. You may be strong enough to climb the next grade already. I know I am. I'm strong enough. My finger force is strong enough to climb 13 plus, but I haven't gotten there yet. And so it's a complex thing, climbing performance. So I'm doing a lot of things right. The missing thing for me it might be somewhat of what you're talking about is technique. And, beginners need to, as I just said, 13-year-old needs to focus on learning how to climb before they get into any serious training. But even adult climbers need to remember, being stronger is not the panacea. It's not the end all. It's not what's going to necessarily get you to the next grade. It's part of the formula. It's part of the system. But so is the mental game, and so is the technical aspects of climbing. And so getting back to me, for example, I've been climbing 40 plus years. You'd think I'm a perfect climber, but I'm not. I'm an imperfect climber. In fact, Ondra is an imperfect climber. I think he would tell you that, because the only way, first of all, you can ever get better is if you believe you're imperfect. If you believe you're perfect, then you lose all curiosity and desire to do the things it takes to get to the next level. And so I know for a fact those pro climbers are always believing that they can improve their game in multiple ways. That's part of their belief system that's going to get them to that next grade and to reach their next goal. And so do you and I need to have that same belief system. So for me, my goal this fall is to climb. I'd like to climb 30 or 40 days outside in the next 3 to 4 months. And by doing that, my economy of movement will improve perhaps by 5 or 10%. And that should open the door, as long as I keep my strength and don't get injured, that should open the door for me to achieve my goal this fall. And so, yeah, climbers, you can't just, view the moon board, the tension board, the hangboard, the campus board as being the pathway to the next grade. Yeah, if you're a boulderer, then maybe they are the most important things, if you're just into doing 3-move boulder routes. But especially if you're a route climber or doing longer boulder routes, then economy of movement and the mental game and, climbing skill and strategy is a huge factor. And so how do you, this gets back to Charles's question, how do you schedule that, or how do you plan that in your workout? And that's tough for me to prescribe. That's where you really need a coach to work with you in person, to be able to evaluate and say, hey, you really climb well on vertical routes, but on steep routes, you're very inefficient. You don't drop knee or back step or twist lock enough. You don't find rests on the route. You don't rest effectively on the route. And when you get on small holds, you slow down, when in reality, you get on small holds on a steep route, you should speed up. A lot of climbers instinctively, they get on the small holds and they start doubting and pausing for thought. And that's the last thing you want to do. When the holds get small, climb faster, get to the next good hold, then think. And so that's the type of coaching I would do with you in person. And I would say, Charles, hopefully climbers like yourself have availability to a coach like that. They can put the whole program together. That's more than I can do through a training cafe or a training for climbing podcast or a training for climbing book. I can give you the understanding and the knowledge, but still putting the program together is something that either you will have to figure out on your own as a self-coach or engage somebody who can. Yeah, this question here reflects, about, how do you deal with naysayers or downgrades or jealousy? And successful people face that in all walks of life. And it could be success on a local level at your local climbing gym or your local crag. It could be success on an international level. Like a big name climber. To be successful, to stay motivated, you need to have a thick skin. That's part of the training I have with my kids. It's a form of mental training, is, from a young age, letting them know that whether it was them playing high school football, people will be skeptical and say, you're climbing. Why are you as a climber playing high school football? Or as a climber who develops routes, there's always going to be critics or downgrades. That's part of the game. And if you're doing anything meaningful, if you're doing anything successful in life, in any field, you are going to have a segment of people that are detractors, and most of the detractors are just miserable human beings that that's how they make themselves feel better, sadly, is by criticizing others rather than looking in the mirror and trying to make their life better. And so, yeah, it's a deep topic. You could get into a lot of philosophy on, I guess. But I think it's best just to ignore the critics. I've learned this or over the years discovered a lot of the peak performers out there, whether it's an actor or a professional athlete, they don't read the newspapers, or the quarterback who had a bad football game probably doesn't read the newspapers or watch Sports Center the next day, because you're just going to hear people criticizing your performance. That doesn't help you improve at all. Getting back on the horse and so to speak, and taking action on your system for improvement is the answer. And so I think you just have to realize that there's always going to be some critics, but you want to be a doer and affiliate and be around doers as much as possible. I've previously talked about, thinking about you are the sum, or you will become the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, because we take on the demeanor and mindset and ways of speaking and ways of thinking and ways of acting we take on of the people we surround ourselves. So if you're hanging out with a horrible mob doing horrible things, you're going to be one of those horrible people. If you hang around with a small group of can-do, forward-thinking, positive, motivated people taking action in their life, whatever it may be, that is giving back to society and elevating themselves and elevating others around them, that's a beautiful thing. That's where I hope we can all be. And, I'm coming up on an hour here. I apologize. I'm not going to get to the last 6 or 8 questions, but I hope you enjoyed this episode of Training Cafe. My coffee here has gotten cold, and I'm going to take a final sip with you. I really appreciate you joining in, and I appreciate the ongoing feedback. And I'll take some constructive feedback if you want to throw something out there, like this podcast or this video is too long or whatnot. But I appreciate the kudos as well. Of course, I'd like to thank my sponsors, La Sportiva and DMM and Maxim Ropes. And don't forget PhysiVantage, my brand for climbing performance nutrition. Visit physivantage.com and check out the product line. If you're training right and eating right and you're doing most things right, performance nutrition can give you an extra edge in recovery, in strength gains, and in performance. If you're doing everything else wrong, then save your money. The nutrition's not going to help you out. So that's my closing thought for today. Hope to see you one of the next 2 Mondays from Las Vegas. I'm flying out to do some climbing up in one of the islands in the sky. Too hot in the desert, but the limestone is cooler. And I'm going to be doing some climbing out there with one of my sons and maybe a few of the rock stars in Vegas as well. So I will maybe check in from the road. Until then, climb strong.